Welcome everyone to our Earth Day event. I am Baptista with the Tishman Environment and Design Center, and I apologize, I'm a little rusty. I haven't done a lot of the Zoom events in a while, but I'm very, very happy to be with our invited guests today and our moderator to talk about this amazing book and preview its launch into the world. So I just want to first welcome you. This preview of the book launch is really a part of a series of events hosted by the Tishman Environment and Design Center at the New School University in New York City. And so the Tishman Center, if you're not familiar with it, is a center that's very much committed to environmental and climate justice and working directly and collaboratively with communities on the front line and fence line. And we do quite a bit of research and practice with communities across the country. And we are going to actually hear from one of our amazing colleagues and collaborators and co-conspirators, Angela, who's going to be on the panel and is also with us at the Tishman Center. But so I just want to welcome all of you. And I think, Audrea, you're going to be doing introductions for all the panelists. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, well, great. Then I'll just briefly introduce you. I don't have your bio in front of me, but I know very well the amazing amount of work that you did as editor in putting together all the amazing stories and writers and journalists and voices for this book, and working really tirelessly to bring the book to life. So I'm very happy that you'll be moderating with us today, and maybe you can tell us a little bit more about yourself too, as well as introduce the rest of the panelists.
Yeah, thank you, Anna. And also thank you to the Tishman Center for hosting us, and to everybody that's joining us to listen in. Yeah, I am a journalist who covers climate and the environmental movement and land issues. And I also put together this book. And I guess before I introduce the panelists and before we get into the discussion, I do just want to give a little bit of a background on the book, so you all kind of know what it is and why we're here and what we're going to talk about today. So this here is the book, The World We Need. It's basically it's a tour through some of the grassroots groups and movements that are tackling environmental and climate issues today. And they're doing so often in conjunction with other issues that are usually thought of as separate, like racial justice, prisons, community development, gentrification. And it does this, the book does this through stories that are, reported by a lot of talented journalists from around the US. It includes interviews with activists, organizers, thinkers in the movement, including, our panelists here today. And it includes, little like galleries of artwork from the movement. And one of the things that this is meant to show is that the environmental movement is already much broader than what people probably think of when they think about the environmental movement. And I think the image that a lot of people have in their heads of what the environmental looks like is pretty white and focused on like nature issues. But this book includes a lot of activists who shy away from and sometimes are even put off by the label environmentalist, because that's just a part of what they do, like a small part of what they do. And they might not associate themselves with the mainstream environmental movement. But what I think this diversity suggests is that the movement can actually be richer and deeper if it's more inclusive. And by inclusive, I don't just mean inclusive of like different identities and demographics, but also inclusive of other progressive struggles. So Anna and Angela were sort of advisors on this book, putting the book together, and all of us began talking about the book and working on it in 2018. That's how long books take to make. And that was, back when the climate crisis had started to be taken seriously as like a really big mainstream pressing issue. But at the time, the sort of overwhelming feeling about it and all of the media coverage about it really was apocalyptic and despairing. Climate change felt like this massive, daunting, systems-wide issue that really it felt like it required that we change literally everything about our lives and our society. And that, we would be forced to deprive ourselves of, all the things we know and enjoy and depend upon, like everything from cars and vacations to everything with like plastic and chemicals in your house, which is basically everything in your house. And at the time, the climate and environmental movement was really dominated, particularly the climate movement was really dominated by big groups like 350.org, which did good work in helping to push the issue into the mainstream. But the focus was really on what seemed like more abstract data points. Like, we've all heard this a billion times before, like, we need to reduce carbon emissions to this many parts per million to keep us below just 2 degrees of global temperature, average temperature rise by like 2040 or 2050 or whatever it is. And that's, a good goal to have. And I trust the scientists who came up with those numbers. But like, what does that mean for me living in a community, or you, or anybody who's trying to sort of change their environment or workplace? And yeah, at the time, the Green New Deal had been introduced as a broad proposal for making this transition away from fossil fuels, but it was very abstract. And I think a lot of people who supported the Green New Deal actually had, like, a lot of people had trouble envisioning it, I think, and didn't really know what it was. But there were these smaller grassroots environmental groups that had been doing critical organizing and activist work on the ground for decades, some of them. And yeah, many of these organizations had not only been fighting these corporations or industries that had been polluting the air and the water in their neighborhoods or towns, what we think of as classic environmental issues, pollution, polluting the air and water, stuff like that. These groups were also working toward building a more like positive vision of a clean, just, regenerative society, basically like their local version of a just transition. So the book's intention is to provide this patchwork vision of some of the different small groups that have, for some of them for quite some time, been sort of chipping away at the big overarching question that we now face as a country and a society, and maybe even as a civilization, which is like, how do we transform our society in a way that not only shifts us away from the carbon intensive fossil fuel based economy, but also brings us closer toward a society that's equitable, balanced, sustainable, or regenerative, or whatever, however you want to describe it, and just more humane. And so all of our panelists have actually been part of this work in some way or another, and I want to introduce them now. So we have Eric Enos, who joins us from Hawaii. The World We Need, it includes a long interview with him about the origins of his work, which is very fascinating. Eric is native Hawaiian, but his extended family touches every shore. He founded Ka'ala Farm, which is a Hawaiian youth cultural learning center that teaches watershed management, sustainable agriculture, and is working within the community to repair the water and the land and to bring people back in balance with the natural world. We also have Arturo Massol-Deyá, who is a professor of microbiology and ecology at the University of Puerto Rico, and he's also the executive director of Casa Pueblo, which is a community group that's working in natural resources conservation, education, and sustainable development. And they've also installed something like 1,000 solar panels, correct me if I'm wrong about this, on local homes and businesses, in part to help Puerto Ricans break their dependence on an electrical system that we all watched fail after Hurricane Maria, and also break their dependence on the colonial government. So there's a short profile of Casa Pueblo in The World We Need. And I should also mention that both Arturo and Eric have been, or their organizations have been doing this work for like many decades now. And then we have Angela, who is the director of the Environmental Justice Movement Fellowship at the New School. That's a 2-year leadership program developed by and for environmental justice grassroots leaders. And she came to this position recently from the Climate Justice Alliance, where she was executive director. And that's an alliance of 74 grassroots frontline groups, including like BIPOC, racial, and economic justice organizations, and poor white communities who are working toward a just transition and just recovery. And as I mentioned before, she was an advisor on this book. And finally, we have Ana Baptista, who is a professor in environmental policy and sustainability management at the New School, and is also associate director of the center. So Ana was also an advisor of this book and wrote the introduction to the book, which contextualizes, I think, the work of the other panelists and of the other groups and organizations within the book, within the environmental justice like history and framework. And she's also working with Angela on the Environmental Justice Movement Fellowship. So with that very lengthy introduction, I just want to begin with a very simple question, actually, for Eric and Arturo, which is just, how did you originally even get into environmental work? Maybe we can start with you, Arturo.
Well, congratulations for the book. I am from a small community in the central part of Puerto Rico. It was in 1980, the government identified like a lot of copper, silver, and gold deposits that they wanted to do mining. And at that point, after that announcement, we quickly realized that mining was very incompatible with the integrity of our land. For it was a threat to biodiversity, to coffee production, for everything. Only good for the miners, but very bad for Puerto Rico. So my parents decided to confront that proposal and got organized the community got organized as Casa Pueblo, and I grew up with them. I participated throughout that process. It took like 15 years to eventually change public policy in Puerto Rico, and at that point we decided to evolve from protesting to proposing alternative and engage in assuming the responsibilities for those proposals. So from mining, we proposed a forest. We had been managing that forest since 1996. And throughout 41 years, actually today is our 41st birthday of Casa Pueblo. And we're celebrating that today as we're plugging in like 2,000 solar panels to power downtown Adjuntas. And actually we were connecting those businesses today to solar power. So from opposing mining to actually proposing alternative to celebrate a change. Our community from now on will be reducing greenhouse gases as we're embracing solar power. and we're pushing for energy independence for the island and as a mean to decolonize the island nation of Puerto Rico.
Happy birthday. And
Thank you.
that sounds really exciting. I'm glad we caught you right on your birthday. What about Eric?
Well, first of all, aloha everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I'm just trying to figure this one out. Yeah. I'm really anxious to roll up my sleeves and learn from people like you guys and Arturo. It's very exciting. And thank you all so much for what you do. It's really encouraging to hear the stories of many others and to realize that we're not alone. Yeah, we sit in our little communities and we try to do the best we can over these years, and and it's very important spiritually to link up to all the good work and all the passion that is around this room or around this screen or that is being bounced off of the satellites spinning in space as we hurtle through space. But yeah, how did I get into this work? Blindly following a path, it's very difficult to know, but and you knew something was wrong and you were part of a system that wasn't working. And I really liked the idea. We started by protesting what we didn't want, and took us a while to figure out what we got to do to make it for us to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. So that's our basis of our work, and then always trust in a higher spirit calling of our common ancestors to, when times are hard, you just have to sit and seek a connection and to your ancestors that are always around us, and then I'm really anxious to hear from the others. So aloha and thank you very much.
Can you say a little about what were the things that you didn't want at the beginning when you started what were you protesting against?
Well, our community, what the Waianae Moku, was the last part of Oahu to be colonized. So we hung in there. It was also the driest and where most of the Native Hawaiians ended up. It's like a reservation, yeah. So, but we saw the march of commercialization of our culture. The hula, the music, the ukulele, the coconut tree, and at the same time we'd be working in those industries and and just seeing the wealth pour in, but the community is getting poorer, or substance abuse and domestic violence was around every corner. And so so that's what drove us. I'm not sure of the question, sorry.
No, yeah, that's a good answer. And actually, when you and I spoke for the interview that's in the book, you told me about how a lot of this work for you began when you were taking the kids that you were working with, who you were teaching art to the back of the Waianae Valley, right? And you discovered these terraces. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, it was all under our feet. We were never knew about our culture. Absolutely. I was educated in one of the best high schools funded by our queen, but it was all very Western, very white, and good teachers. Don't get me wrong, but they were all Western trained. And we never saw our own people in that same light. So, but that's started our journey into introspection, and then to really say, hey, there's something here, and we need to discover it.
Can you tell us about what was in the back of the Waianae Valley? What was it used for before, and what did you discover there?
There were ancient terraces that our people, it was a community that was just, water was drained by the plantations, and all Native Hawaiians ended up as squatters on the outskirts of Honolulu. Yeah. And traditional food and our language was forbidden, and so we learned to be good Americans, but very angry. And so a lot of the anger is taken out on your own family. So we just, so by discovering that, we discovered our way back through our food, through the water rights, bringing back the water from that the plantations diverted and bringing it back to these traditional lands, that so we could start growing plants for food, medicine, fiber, shelter, adornment, and then use that as the basis to organize from tradition to modernity, and to embrace science and physics and biology and botany, and to know that our ancestors were very scientific in their knowledge, and going back to the ancient wisdom, but applying it to the future ancestors, that our children will have to have a role in fixing all the stuff that is being taught, and all the things that have been done to all indigenous people. And we are all indigenous, every one of us is indigenous to some place, and we need to take care of that place. Yeah.
Yeah, the thing that you had told me that I thought was interesting is that this back of the valley, right, was where the syndicates, the gangs, used to like dump stolen cars and bodies. And you were taking the youth, right, to the back of this valley just to go hiking and camping. And yeah, you found these terraces. You didn't know what they were, right? But they were cultural sites, and people at the museum, you reached out to them to find out what it was. Is that right? And then they
Correct.
told you, by looking back at these old maps, that it was the entire area was under taro cultivation, which you told me was a very important part of your culture that you didn't really know about because of the schooling that you just mentioned, right? But water had long ago been diverted towards sugar plantations. And you guys, with the help of government and local agencies, you built a new irrigation system, flooded the valley, got help from these Japanese taro farmers, right? Who you guys had helped with direct action eviction defense. Years before, they helped you to come clear the land. Am I getting all of this right? It's just such a fascinating story.
Yeah, well, you don't get the sequence right, but that's we went up there. We took the kids from the park. I was working with the park gang. I was teaching them art, and and that was the highest concentration. All these kids whose parents weren't around, and then we went to the valleys that were fighting being evicted farmers, and they're farmers of all different nationalities. Yeah. But they were being evicted, and we took our local kids there and to learn about the struggle, and they put us on the front line because we were the biggest. And we learned, and from that experience we learned about taro, and yeah, so that experience helped us to. They in turn came back, and when we brought down the water and fought the water rights, they were right by us. So that's part of the story. Thank you.
I'm actually curious, Arturo, I know you guys are in very different parts of very different far apart islands. I'm wondering though, if you hear any echoes of your own experience in Eric's story, or are there any connections that you?
Yes, of course. But in the case of Hawaii, the complete assimilation of the island was sort of like not as such a positive endpoint. And many people in Puerto Rico, due to that high sense of dependency that colonialism has imposed over Puerto Rico over 120 something years, many people, I think, are thinking about statehood as the endpoint, politically speaking. And this is very, there's a strong culture in Hawaii. I think Puerto Rico, we have a strong cultural identity. We call ourselves Puerto Ricans. We're not Puerto Rican Americans in New York. We're not Puerto Rican American in Chicago. We're just Puerto Ricans. And that's because we have a strong sense of identity geographically to the island of Puerto Rico. We speak Spanish, so I'm struggling here with English. And I think that sense of identity is helping promote a culture, an ecological culture, a culture of responsibility, of more responsibility with the island and the planet, because in order to survive as a cultural group, we need to protect the integrity of the land. So we share sort of the common, we share similar challenges and commitment to the land and to the culture and to the people.
Okay. I mean, yeah, now I'm wondering also how all of this like connects to, you know, movements and groups that are working, you know, in the lower 48. And so Angela, I'm wondering, just through your work with, you know, grassroots climate and environmental groups across many regions, demographics, and across issues, where do you see the continuities between these different movements? And when you're building coalitions and alliances across them, like, how do you ensure that each of their individual autonomy and like unique contexts and experiences are celebrated and respected?
That's a big question. I think that's the 500-year-old question about what's happening. Primarily with the fact that today is what we call Earth Day, but Earth Day is really every day, right? Like our ancestors really taught us that Earth Day is something we have to practice every day. So we're practicing it today and we have to practice it tomorrow, and our future generations have to practice it and learn how to do that from our elders. So first, I just want to say, Audrey, congratulations on getting the book out, right? You got it out. We really, it was a labor of love. We worked with journalists and movement people and got all these stories together. And it's also a great experience to have movement folk be able to collaborate with journalists, right? Like oftentimes, even that relationship isn't exposed. A lot of our groups don't have communication staff. So this is a real celebration for the environmental justice movement. So I just want to take a moment to celebrate you, celebrate Anna. I see Dan on here and Mark and a lot of other folks that helped, obviously all the folks that were interviewed. And so those stories are really rich. I think that's the first thing that we learn in EJ, right? Like, let people speak for themselves and you will be transformed by their stories and their lived experience and their struggle. And that has been my experience, both at the Climate Justice Alliance and what we're trying to build here at the Environmental Justice Fellowship, is that if we create a space for people to build power, they will fill that space and build more power than you have ever seen before. And I hope that this book directs us in that like North Star. I bet if we asked Arturo and Eric, they could probably say lots of ways that we show up, like national organizations or academia show up in bad ways, right? In ways that are harmful. And colonialism is a good example of that, right? The extractive system that we've been a part of, but we've also been able to build. So I think, you know, as we locate ourselves within the environmental movement in and of itself has a lot of complexity and a history that is very separate from us as like social movements, and where EJ locates itself within a larger social movement that doesn't have these imaginary boundaries, that is much more expansive, that builds forward and, you know, from the past. And a lot of that played out, you know, if I think about, you know, how just recovery is taking hold of the American consciousness here in the US, but also how it takes hold and manifests itself in the diaspora, and the power of the diaspora and the power of people when we think about the environment, right? And we think about environmental justice, because when we are faced with what scientists say we are going to face in the next 8 to 10 years, we can either say, hey, that's our destiny, or we can actually organize and build power. And Just Recovery was a good example of that, of how we co-learn with communities that are most impacted, those that are on the front lines. I think, you know, Puerto Rico and Hawaii as US colonies, and like the power that we have to shift this colonial system to have a stronger movement together. And some of that played out after Maria. And so much that we learned as social movements and environmental justice movement when we were able to go to Puerto Rico and see the resiliency and the power of the people when government institutions were failing them, right? And I think a lot of that plays out on the free, prior, and informed consent that Native Hawaiians have been able to teach us and able to hold onto their land, and how our movement is greater than the local fight that we have, but we're part of a movement for a just transition. That means we're freeing many communities in the experience of the doing of environmental justice every day, and the building of new systems that are more representative of the kind of future we want to see ourselves play and be a part of. So that, you know, I think there's a lot happening on the climate front, if we want to get very concrete, right, Audrey? Like, yeah, there's climate leaders meeting today, right? International climate leaders are meeting with Biden today, talking about what the future of the planet is. We've often, as a movement, done the same thing on the outskirts of that. Like, we hold our own people spaces. We have our own ways of having self-governance and planning out the future that we see in terms of climate justice.
Can you just say very quickly what just recovery means? I think that term is not as well known as transition.
Yeah, I mean, historically, and I'm sure, you know, many people on the call can talk about just recovery. It's a term that was coined by environmental justice groups and folks that were recovering from Katrina initially, right, in the Gulf. And it gathered a lot of force during Hurricane Harvey, right? So folks in Texas and in Houston were experiencing not only a disaster, which is the way that we have been classifying the increasing impacts of the climate crisis in communities, but you know, what they were experiencing in terms of what needed to happen for a mutual community to community response to what's happening with the changing climate. And then obviously, you know, I don't know, Arturo can share so much more, but there was a huge movement of people, both in this side of the colonial structure and in Puerto Rico, moving just recovery in an impactful way when Hurricane Maria hit. And that was our experience through the Climate Justice Alliance, so that the diaspora really gathered a lot of energy from, you know, everywhere from New York, Miami, you know, people out in California and Chicago, all kind of trying to figure out how to have a people-to-people solutionary response that goes beyond just an immediate extractive response to disaster, to one that actually thinks about resiliency, long-term planning, and setting up the people that have gone through disaster in a way, in a climate crisis, in a way that they then are better positioned and even have better infrastructure to combat future and very likely climate emergencies.
Yeah, Arturo, do you actually want to add anything to that, since Angela called you out?
You know that before Hurricane Maria, every time there's something goes on in like an earthquake in Haiti or Nicaragua or hurricane passing by another island in the Caribbean, you will see people from Puerto Rico getting together and to send out support to those other Caribbean islands or nations. After Hurricane Maria, many nations like the Cubans, Mexicans, and other islands, they wanted to help Puerto Rico after the hurricane, and they were prohibited from getting nearby Puerto Rico. So everything had to be channeled through the U.S. Congress, through the U.S. government, and we got a delayed response, weak response, a very racist response to Puerto Rico. And when funding was allocated to Puerto Rico, we had to buy everything at the U.S. We have to bring labor force from the U.S. We have to use U.S. vessels for here. All the indirect cost was for the Army Corps of Engineers. So like 90% of everything that was supposed to be to help Puerto Rico, it went back to the U.S. economy. Actually, Hurricane Maria was a mean for economic activation, not for Puerto Rico, but for many U.S. businesses And that's the unfair part, unjust. If you want to help Puerto Rico, that's not the way. And if you're gonna rewire and reset the same energy model, for example, of fossil fuel dependency, you're not pushing Puerto Rico for climate adaptation and to be in a better position with more ecological responsibility. What they use that money to actually make colonialism more resilient, more permanent, which is the unfair part of how support to Puerto Rico had been channeled by the U.S. government after Hurricane Maria and even before. So yeah, it's a big problem because it's not promoting change and better well-being for the local people. It's not intended. That's the even worst. It's not even intended to make it better for the local people in the long run. So I don't know. That's why we keep pushing for bottom-up social initiative as means for local development.
Anna, I'm wondering if you can help us to understand where these different local movements today sort of fit in the history of social movements, and like, do these environmental groups like Eric and Heroes, do they actually have more in common with like racial and economic justice groups that focus on issues outside the environmental movement, or are they closer to the mainstream environmental movement? And have you seen the mainstream environmental movement sort of shift as a result of this?
Yeah, and I would say that, you know, when I wrote the introductory chapter, I had the opportunity to read all of the beautiful stories in the book, including Arturo's and Eric's stories. And to me, it was clear, I mean, that what connects so many of these communities here and all over the world, really, is that they really have, you know, very similar perspectives on the root causes of the problems, right? And in many ways, the environmental justice movement is much more aligned with social justice movements and liberatory and abolitionist movements, because they do have a much more critical analysis from where the problems that they are experiencing firsthand, not in an abstract way, but in a very concrete and tangible way that in many cases are matters of life and death, survival, subsistence. And that's a very different type of movement than a movement that that we associate here in the US as a mainstream environmental or conservation movement, which comes from a very different lineage of colonialism. And, you know, quite honestly, it's very, very racist and white supremacist ideals of nature and nature as apart and different from and separated from human societies. And so I think that the stories that we have, this beautiful tapestry of stories in the book, represents not just, you know, local stories, but, you know, very interconnected web and ecosystems of communities across the world, really, because the struggles of these local communities in many ways are connected to the same systemic crises of not just the ecological climate crisis, but the economic, you know, colonialist, you know, capitalist projects that are driving inequality and climate change and oppression in various different systems. So, you know, I would say that the mainstream environmental movement in the US and maybe in many of the Western countries, it's interesting that they have come to really start using the rhetoric of environmental and climate justice. That the verbiage, the discourse has become much more mainstream, but the ideologies, the root analysis, perhaps has not shifted as much. Because, and you can see that in the types of solutions and the approaches that the two different movement organizations put forth, where many of the environmental justice grassroots frontline fence line communities are seeking much more transformative, right, systemic changes. And they may seem small in terms of scale, right, but they have an analysis that speaks to alternatives, an alternative system, a systems that present, real possibilities for liberation, and maybe even decolonization, and maybe even, alternative economic systems that are not as exploitative. And so, we can see some of the evidence of, those underlying ideologies and the ways that the mainstream groups, approach climate change versus many of the organizations that we feature in the book, which really are not just stories of resistance, but stories of reconstruction and stories of, alternatives. So yeah, I definitely see that the lineage of these different movements comes from very different analyses of the problem.
Yeah, in thinking about, how a lot of these different movements connect together and how they don't. Actually, Eric, I remember when we spoke for the interview, you talked about being inspired by these movements that were happening on the mainland, like the Black Power movement and all of those. And then you also talked about how you would now today often will have, exchanged ideas, and other groups from different parts of the world and will come and visit you all and learn from you. I'm wondering if you can just tell us about some of these different inspirations that you drew from other movements in different places, and the stuff that you're sharing with organizations and groups from other parts of the US and the world.
Yeah, thanks. That's well said. I really appreciate what. I think Arturo and we come from that generation, of our, it's the Vietnam War and what was happening with the American Indian movement and Cesar Chavez with the agriculture workers, and and all these indigenous peoples were rising up and says, wait, whose economy is this, and how is our land and our water and our culture and our histories being portrayed in the classrooms where we go to, and we pledge allegiance to this flag that has no meaning to me, and so the food that we eat is all imported in cans. And why is this when we're surrounded by natural wealth, and why is this natural wealth being exploited and carted off? And why do all the wealthy people have the best lands, and all our native people have the worst lands that has no water or are swamps? And why do they put all our waste and all the dumping of toxic materials on the lands that they gave us that wasn't good to begin with? So those histories, but so that's what's, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to put some context into this. So many things I'm thinking through the process for us to reconstruct our lives and to set the stage for the youth to take. And that's what's so encouraging about the work, is working with the youth and to see that in their eyes a vision for the future, and just seeing them get it, and to say, we're going to help to change the system, and we're going to learn from our ancestors and from those that have come before us. So mahalo, Arturo, for the work. And we have a large Puerto Rican community in Hawaii. They're all part of us, our culture. So so mahalo.
Arturo, what about you guys? Are you drawing inspiration or just strength from movements in other places, or do you work with groups and movements in other places today?
I have to clarify, I'm not from the Vietnam generation. I'm younger, Eric. From Desert Storm or something like that. But
Okay.
No, but I'm a little bit after that, but I quickly learn about that conflict and how that shaped our society at that time. And when I hear Eric, I mean, I think sometimes I'm thinking that he's talking about Puerto Rico, not Hawaii. So we share some, the consequences of colonialism. They do repeat itself. The damages they do elsewhere. With regard to working with others, we have done it. Um, and we, let's see, we get inspiration. We're not isolated. We do see what is happening elsewhere. It helps us somehow clarify our ideas and views of the future. But I have to say that we are also very unique, let's say, within Puerto Rico. And when we got organized, the ecological consciousness of the country was very low. It was more ideological. It was, for example, the open street mining proposal. Some people said yes, mining for the Republic of Puerto Rico. Other people said, okay, let's do mining because we're going to sell the statehood. Or because we're a colony. So the differences of when to do open street mining was based on the political future of the island and not, the consequences of that economical system over our natural resources and the future of our island nation and our nationality. And since I think during that process, we have been working with others, and we were participating in a network of forests in Latin America. So it helps break the island isolation to our neighbors. So working with addressing environmental issues in Puerto Rico has allowed us, to get engaged with many other groups that are not U.S. based, and I think that has been a bless. I mean, working with environmental factors, issues, and forest conservation has somehow allowed the community to work aside with countries that we are, let's say, politically isolated from them.
Yeah, speaking about this generation difference, I mean, your father started this organization, and he was probably, I guess, Eric's generation, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, Arturo.
No. Just teasing you.
Is this kind of a generational shift actually within your movement, that you have this one continuous movement or this one continuous organization, and you're doing some of the things you do, many of the things you do are kind of similar. I mean, you are a community organization, but now your explicit focus, or you call yourself an environmental organization. Is that kind of a generational thing?
Well, in my case, I will say that there is a continuity. I was born and raised over in Adjuntas. I have been growing up with my parents. I was old enough to see what it was happening back then in 1980. They're still running Casa Pueblo and pushing from the inside out. I'm sort of like from the outside to help the community from outside to the community. And I don't see I don't like to call it like a generational change. I see it like no, we're still engaged and learning from each other. We have been evolving all the time, so we're not a fixed organization. We're environmental, we're social, we're about education. We have a school inside a forest, we have a radio station, we have a solar cinema. I mean, we process coffee. So some people call us, oh, these are the coffee producer group, or the forest guys, or the radio people, and we don't. I mean, we're about breaking the model of dependency and embracing, with ecological consciousness, and if they want to label us as an environmental group, is okay. But there's a lot of, I mean, it's very political what we're doing. And right now, all the energy projects that we're promoting in Adjuntas, we call it the Energy Insurrection. It's a bottom-up approach to confront the top-down resistance to change the way Puerto Rico is producing energy. So if it's not happening from the top to the bottom, we're gonna push it. We're gonna push it from the bottom up, and it is an insurrection. What's the word?
Insurrection.
Yeah. We're challenging what the status quo, and we want to promote change, and we're happy about it. So now we are the solar guys, not so much environmental, but the I don't know. As we move as we progress, people will see us and label us based on what we're doing at that time, and it's very interesting, and we're happy. But yes, we're environmentalists, but that's not the whole story.
Angela, I'm wondering if what Arturo and Eric have just talked about, does that resonate with your experience, like bringing these dozens and dozens of different frontline groups together?
I mean, I've been nodding my head since we got on the call. I'm like one of the dogs you put on the cars. You're like, yes, 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 everything, yes. Like, part of the problem is we have these silos, right? That is the problem right there, is that we're siloed, and we need that's how we're making meaning of the world. And in fact, we have to be making meaning of the world by the relationships, right? And we're always in this place, I think, working as movement, as community groups or environmental justice groups, picking up all of these different narratives that feel like, either they're, it's a sexy, trendy funders word that came up, is there resilience today? Or is there, what word do we need to fill into to be able to like fit how we can move our actual community grounded plan? So yeah, it resonates a lot to hear that, right? But I still think that there is work that we need to do to be really clear about the differences between the environmental movement and the environmental justice movement, because the environmental justice movement has actually helped to better the environmental movement in so many ways. And that came from struggle, right? Environmental justice movement is working to, fight the bad, all those things, the power plants, the incinerators, the clean energy that really isn't clean energy, but it's being put out by all of the governments as clean energy, but it's really not. All of these things groups on the ground are fighting. And we're also fighting to hold and gravitational pull to center the kinds of things that you've been bringing up, Audrey, like social justice, racial justice, right? The fact that people are facing gentrification, right? That our energy systems are not benefiting us. We found out in a very like international way that Houston is paying, folks there are paying exorbitant amounts of money, right? Not only during the extreme energy events, but like generally speaking, and that's where all of this fossil fuel industry, like a majority of it lives. So I think we're battling multiple narratives, and we're trying to fit in where we can get in a lot of ways, but that's not the way that we're actually going to win. So we're going to win by really creating that space. And that's why, again, going back to the book, why I love this book, because that is a book full of those stories, and it gives you examples. A lot of times people say, oh, that's a great idea, but you can't scale it, right? Oh, that's such a beautiful thing that oh, how cute what's happening over there, right? But actually, it is that kind of model of mycelium, or like the microgrids that extend beyond and through many different communities, that is the future of how we can relate to the environment. And we have to be bringing in the rights of nature and the rights of rivers, and really think about how we personalize and build in relationship in the environment. It's hard for me to think about an environmental group, or I can probably name them on my hand, the environmental groups that I feel like we could really, that we could really say that they've transitioned in a way that they did that on their own, right? Without the pressure from the environmental justice movement. You know, you talked about the Green New Deal. That's a great example, right? There's a lot of organizing that happened around the Green New Deal behind the scenes with Sunrise, with congressional representatives, with other Greens and other partners to make sure that it was something that at least it's in some part represented the environmental justice movement. And I'm saying that now because, again, you know, bringing it back to something concrete, you know, the Thrive agenda just came out. You know, it's an upgraded version of the Green New Deal. You're you know, again, there's a, you know, $2 trillion infrastructure plan put out by the Biden administration that's going to be moving, and like, who's ready to, you know, integrate those kinds of designs and infrastructure in place at the local level.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up just the organizing aspect, the political organizing aspect of, you know, yeah, all of this work happening nationally. And I'm just noticing that there's a couple of questions that are coming through that are kind of in this vein, and I just want to be mindful that it is 6 o'clock. So yeah, everybody out there who has questions, please send them in via the chat, or you can also email them to Mike. I think he dropped his email address in the chat at some point. But yeah, so the first question that we have here is, I would love to hear everyone's perspective on how do we leverage our individual voices, organizations, and communities for greater global political change. So basically, how do other people sort of plug into all of this work is how I interpret the question. And there's actually a second question that's related to this from a different viewer, audience member, which is, what have been the ways that you all tackle the digital divide in the middle of this pandemic when it comes to connecting and educating folks about the issues and solutions at hand? And so this is a question for all four of you, I think. So anybody want to jump in?
I just want to say something about the digital divide. We have a school, we built a school inside a forest. And with the pandemic, the lockdown and the way the government is sort of deciding, you know, telling people you have to stay inside and that's the way you get protected. We have been pushing, well, we are an island with plenty of natural resources. You can get physical distancing. Why not embracing and using those natural attributes as a means to deal with the pandemic? We have coastal areas, we have forest, we have plenty of possibilities to people, you know, be safe, protected, and at the same time, you know, engaging in contact with nature. So what we have done is we set up as an audio guide that you can upload in your cell phone, and you have a map, and you can go to the school, but with your family in a very protected way. So we found at least one way of using digital options as a way to combine that to facilitate participation and visitation from the public to the natural forest. So I know it's a big challenge, but I think the natural attributes in Puerto Rico have been misused under, I mean, we should be happy. I mean, not happy with the pandemic and the COVID, but we should, you know, health is not just be free from COVID. You have to be healthy in other ways, and you have to promote that. And again, the government missed that part of utilizing best practices to use the what we have in the island. I'm sure in Hawaii is even better as a way to deal with all the risk associated to this virus. So, but digital, I mean, it can be used, but I think had been abused during the last year.
Yeah, that echoes what we're doing, Arturo. Almost exactly. You know, me not being a techie, but some of our partners have found, you know, like the gamers. So taking a look at gaming and video, and then translating that and converting that into real life, the game of life, and actually going out into the community and taking on real life issues and putting it into a way that you could take your phone and tell stories by creating this web of information and creativity, so that you have the digital artists and the creative people, so it becomes like a street opera. And so though, you know, all the world is a stage, and every part of the movement is part of an issue, whether it be homelessness or crime or where, and then where good things are happening. And so there's stories, capturing all these stories, so you can take your phone and an app and actually using virtual reality to get into this world. So it's very interesting how this COVID has totally, like Arturo said, you know, turn it around, how to use the media and its resources that really suck the mind and soul out of our people, out of the youth, and transform that into a real life game of life and taking on real issues. So that's just the tip of that iceberg.
Ana and Angela, what have you been hearing from you've been working with these environmental justice movement people, leaders and activists from around the country. What are you hearing from them about, bridging the digital divide and just about race building, organizing, bringing more people into the movement? Ana.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if Angela, were you trying to get, I think you were muted, Angela. No. I was going to try to make Angela go first, but I mean, I'm going to be honest. I'm supposed to be on sabbatical right now, so I'm a little bit out of the loop. But I mean, from what I've seen, what was really inspiring is that the organizing actually in many ways got exacerbated, you know, with COVID-19 and the Black Lives Matter, the murder of George Floyd. We saw an explosion of people on the streets. And it just reminded, I think, me, and I think a lot of folks in movement in movements that sometimes these massive disruptions like a pandemic or like a climate crisis or disaster elicit, you know, some really powerful opportunities and openings, you know, almost like cosmic openings, say, you know, to really move people and move the public narrative about what's possible. You know, I think, you know, this idea that we were locked down and we couldn't, you know, express some of the resistance and frustration, all of that was just like torn open, you know, especially with the Black Lives Matter protests. And because these are intersecting crises, right? Like, you know, I think there's so much inspiration that can be drawn about, you know, still moving resistance, still taking to the streets, and seizing those windows of opportunity where we have the world's eyes on us. And so I think that's always going to be true. And I think the climate crisis is going to continue to open up ruptures, right, that will require you know, more and more responses from folks, unfortunately, on the front lines experiencing those things. So we, you know, I think a lot of communities, EJ communities, are grappling with how they're going to withstand not only withstand, but try to really build off of the multiple shocks that are coming, that are already happening and are going to continue to come. And the scale of organizing that's going to be required to move us in a different direction. But yeah, and I would say, you know, I have students all the time. They come from all over the world, and they're always asking how they can get involved and participate and be engaged. And you know, sometimes their first reaction is to just go into other communities and sort of like be the saviors, like, I'm here, I know all these things I learned in school and I'm gonna save you. And so one of the most important things you have to learn in school, that hopefully they're learning at the new school, is like, the first thing you should be doing is listening, learning, and also starting with your own community. All of us have a story, all of us have a community, we all are part of many communities. And so we need to start there and transform ourselves and transform our own communities, so that, you know, we can be humble and also not have that mentality of like coming in.
And I love that answer. I'm not gonna say anything about the digital divide. I think Arturo Eric nailed that. That was beautiful. I want to go through that program. I want to be on that and be at the school. You know, I did get coffee from where somebody brought me a little thing. Before I ever went to Puerto Rico, I got a bit of coffee from wherever you grow it on the island. So I had a taste of it. There's a couple of things I think that are really important. One, like, let's be real. Like, if we are real true to environmental justice values, that means that we're not just worried about our struggle, we're doing the unifications of all struggles for a united front. So we do have to continue pushing to defund the police, right? We had to completely abolish the police, right? Because it's a military system that is not only holding Black communities, right, our elders, our children, hostage and killing them. It's like the whole system of it. So that's something you can do today. It's obviously more present now than ever. And we have these openings right now. We all have to put our energy behind it and help each other's movements. The other thing that's being released right now is the Black Green New Deal. It's just launching today. So maybe Mike or someone can put that link in there, or I can find it and put it in, but it's launching today, right? So it's the Black Lives Matters perspective and like policy platform on the Green New Deal, right? There's the Blue New Deal. There's so many feminist New Deal, Green New Deal. This is the latest one that has taken a lot of energy to build together. So I would say get behind that. And then I agree, you know, everybody has a community. So my struggle here in Miami, because I'm based out of Miami, is nuclear. And I always bring it up because I live really close to the refinery here. So I live really close to the plant here, right? And so, you know, nuclear is being considered as one of the clean energy solutions, like so many others, right? Incinerators, carbon capture, sequestration. There's so many false solutions that are coming out. So if you could just educate yourself really and understand what real clean energy solutions are, and help us fight nuclear as a clean energy, at least for my community and my children. And I hope that, you know, and also for people that live by the mines, where that's fine, and where it's going to be transported. So that's my ask, and from my community to yours. And I'm sure you have other struggles that you need to be building power around. It's an honor to be here. And if this is not enough, there's like more than like half a dozen, if not more, stories that are coming up. This is the preview, and can't wait to get our hands on the book.
Yeah, just adding to that, to your list of different color New Deals, there's also the Red New Deal. There's like a book that came out, Common Notions publishing house, that people can check out. And also, since you mentioned just the military, like the US military, and I just want to emphasize that both Puerto Rico and Hawaii have, you know, these like long histories of US military presence that have just polluted the land and the water, and remain like a heavy presence on both islands. And, you know, that's still happening all over the world where there's US military bases. But yeah, just to close out, actually, Angela, since Anna mentioned the COVID recovery, I'm wondering, since you mentioned the just recovery at the very beginning, do you think that this concept that came from the environmental and climate justice movement, and that we think of as being just associated with the environment and climate change, does this apply more broadly as we're thinking about like COVID recovery and just moving from whatever this is that we're living in right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bigger question that we can resolve in the next 2 minutes, but I do think that we should change our language and stop thinking so much about recovery and think about how do we set our communities up to be positioned to be able to kind of build the infrastructure that we need, the relationships that we need. And there is that parallel that we're seeing by those most impacted by COVID, our same communities that are most impacted by environmental injustice, that the quality of the air, the quality of the water, the way that we have a relationship to the land all has impact on how we can navigate not only the current environmental racism and toxicity of where we live as sacrifice zones and sacrifice communities of this current system, but that in fact there is a lot of power in building around that. So yes, we have to make the parallels between what's happening with COVID and the way that we got here, and how communities are putting forth solutions that then can resolve multiple crises at the same time.
So finally, to actually close out, I'm wondering, just for each of you, do you have like an event or a campaign or just some happening coming up that you want to plug? Arturo, let's start with you.
If you want to support Casa Pueblo and what we're doing, one way to do it is by getting Café Madre Isla, what Angela just got. We're selling coffee as a way to generate our own income. So what we're doing is based on our own economic project. And with that, you can enjoy good coffee, and you can help our community as well. You can buy it in casapueblo.org. You can get a hold of that coffee. We're promoting the Energy Insurrection in Puerto Rico. So anything you want to do to support what we're doing, will be more than happy. We have engaged with multiple groups in the US, including the Hono Foundation with Alex Hono. We have been working with other diaspora groups, Puerto Ricans in the US, in New York, Los Angeles. So if you want to help us somehow, visit our website and write to us, and let's see if we can find a match. But it has been a long day, so I'm kind of tired right now. I know Eric is starting his day over Hawaii, but in Puerto Rico. But I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here. I want to congratulate you with the book. I'm looking forward to see it, actually. So, and happy to engage with Angela and Anna, and just to meet Eric as well. It has been a blast.
Happy birthday again. Eric, how about you? Anything you want to plug?
Well, it's been really a pleasure and an honor to meet you all and to be part of this process. I see some friends have joined, are sitting and listening to this, and we really want to be able to reach out to every single one of you, because your stories really weave with our stories, and the many solutions that you have come. We really want to start talking to each other, and I think it's really in marketing our ideas and getting a lot of people to embrace it and to support it, and it's really understanding the message. And if more people understand the message and say that this is cool, this is what I want to be, I want to relate to this movement, how do I get this t-shirt, and how do I get how do I support it, so that it becomes a really a movement that crosses boundaries and crosses oceans and crosses mountain peaks and passages, you know, so that we really come, you know, from the four grandmothers of the four directions, that it's really a worldwide movement of communities. And as empires crumble, we create small, sustainable communities of many colors and many foods from all the grandmothers' kitchens. Yeah, thank you all so much.
I'm glad you were able to make it. I'm glad to see your face. Anna, anything you want to plug?
Nothing at all, but thank you to all of you. It was such a wonderful blessing to be able to spend a little time with you on Earth Day.
Angela?
Thank you, Audrey, for being a great moderator and for bringing in all our stories in this space. Just a pleasure to meet Eric and Arturo in this space. I know Anna well. I work with Audrey and so many of you here at the new school and folks that are joining us. I just love to direct you to the chat. I put in our link for the Environmental Justice Movement Fellowship. And this is my plug for Eric and Arturo to, in the next, you know, I think it's June, we'll put out the applications, and we'd love really powerful grassroots organizations to bring some of their leaders through the program so that we can continue building power. And for everyone else, there's a link, and there's a social media campaign that we did, which was environmental justice is non-negotiable, and it shares stories and videos and brings in more of the voices of the environmental justice movement.
Okay, thank you all for being on the panel. It was a pleasure. It was illuminating to listen to all of your insights and experiences. Thank you, everybody, all of you out there for joining us and asking questions and listening in. This again is the book, The World We Need. It'll be out in stores May 4th, I think. And thank you to the Tishman Center. Does anybody, just the Tishman Center, do you all need to add anything or?
Not at all, just you've said it all, Audrey, so we can wrap it up.
Okay, well, thank you all, and